As the Belgian town of La Glaise burned around him, 29-year-old SS Lieutenant Colonel Joachim Peiper stayed composed in his headquarters, listening to reports and giving orders. Outside, his outnumbered tanks were engaged in fierce combat with American armor. It was December 22, 1944, and Peiper's forces were desperately holding onto the small town, anxiously awaiting a relief column. 6 days earlier, Peiper had led the charge as the spearhead of Adolf Hitler's Operation Autumn Fog, better known as the Battle of the Bulge. Initially, he commanded a formidable force of 4,800 men, 117 tanks, and a host of other vehicles and heavy weapons, including the terrifying Tiger II or King Tiger heavy tanks. The King Tigers of Germany were some of the most feared weapons of their time. With their thick armor and powerful gun, they were designed to dominate the battlefield. Yet, amidst the snow-covered forests and muddy ground of the Ardennes, these steel behemoths struggled to live up to their fearsome reputation. Kampfgruppe Peiper, in particular, failed to achieve their objectives. Now, reduced to about 800 men and with no fuel left for his vehicles, Peiper faced an increasingly grim reality. The campaign thus far has starkly demonstrated how poorly suited Germany's tank corps was for the task handed to them by the Führer. After just 2 weeks of fighting, the Ardennes campaign delivered a death blow to the Panzer force in the west. This outcome was due to a combination of factors, some known before the offensive and others that emerged as the German spearheads lunged for the Meuse River. From treacherous terrain and brutal weather conditions to strategic missteps and logistical nightmares, we'll break down the elements that led to one of Germany's most significant failures in World War II. December 16, 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. In the rugged, densely wooded Ardennes forest, Germany launched its last major offensive on the Western Front. Hitler aimed for a surprise attack to split the Allied forces and turn the tide of the war in Germany's favor. The German Panzer divisions in the west were largely destroyed in Normandy and had to be completely rebuilt for the Ardennes offensive. Prioritizing this operation, new tanks were distributed to the west over the east from October to December 1944. The Panzer divisions had changed significantly over the course of the war. By 1944, they had fewer tanks and were more defensively oriented compared to the aggressive blitzkrieg tactics of 1939 to 41. One significant difference between German and U.S. tank divisions at this stage was the allocation between tanks and mechanized infantry. U.S. divisions maintained a balanced composition with 3 tank battalions, 3 armored infantry battalions, and 3 armored artillery battalions. In contrast, German divisions reflected a more defensive strategy adopted by the Wehrmacht after 1943. They favored greater infantry strength and less emphasis on armored units. By 1944, German panzer divisions typically comprised 6 battalions of Panzer Grenadiers and only 2 battalions of tanks. This composition highlighted Germany's shift towards a more infantry-centric approach during the later stages of World War II. By 1944, the Wehrmacht hoped to replace all its existing medium tanks with the Panther. However, its high cost and Germany's limited production capacity prevented this. As a result, Panzer regiments generally fielded a mix of tanks, typically comprising 1 battalion of Panther tanks and 1 battalion of Panzer IVs. The Panther Model G was an outstanding vehicle in terms of armored protection, mobility, and firepower, making it the best tank in combat during the Ardennes campaign. Its sloped glassy armor rendered it nearly impervious to all U.S. Army tank guns, with the exception of the powerful 90mm gun on the M36 tank destroyer and the new HVAP ammunition. The Panther's formidable long 75mm gun could pierce the armor of any existing U.S. Army tank at normal combat ranges, except for the rare M4A3E2, or Sherman Jumbo Assault Tank. Its wide tracks provided lower ground pressure than most American armored vehicles, giving it superior mobility in snow and mud. The Panzer IV, while an older design than the Panther, remained a formidable weapon on the 1944 battlefield. It was comparable to the M4 Sherman medium tank in most technical respects, but boasted a superior 75mm gun. The King Tiger was deployed in the Ardennes, with the expectation that its formidable presence would overwhelm the enemy. Despite its impressive armor and firepower, its combat performance in the West was underwhelming. The 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion supported Kampfgruppe Peiper, but the Tiger II's cumbersome nature on the rural roads of the Belgian countryside led Peiper to reassign it to support the faltering 3rd Paratrooper Division. Some of Hitler's planners were optimistic, hoping Peiper could cover the 80 miles to the Meuse River by the end of the first night. Dietrich's chief of staff, however, took a more realistic approach, projecting a 4-day journey. Peiper himself was less than enthusiastic. His route would take him through confined towns, on twisting and turning two-lane roads that crossed numerous bridges. These roads were not built for tanks, but for bicycles, Peiper explained to his superiors. Unlike the open expanses of the Soviet Union, where tanks could maneuver freely for an attack, Peiper's route forced his unit into a long, stretched-out column spanning miles. As German fuel stocks dwindled and fuel trucks struggled to keep pace with the lead tanks, Peiper faced the daunting task of capturing American fuel depots along his route, an uncertain and challenging prospect at best. The dense forests and narrow, twisting roads of the Ardennes posed significant challenges for the heavy panzers. Designed for open battlefield maneuvers, these tanks struggled with restricted movement and poor visibility. The harsh winter weather exacerbated their difficulties. Heavy snowfall and freezing temperatures caused mechanical breakdowns, and many tanks were immobilized in the muddy terrain. Hitler's plan for the offensive was inspired by Case Yellow, the Wehrmacht's lightning-fast armored thrust through the Ardennes in 1940, which caught the French and British armies by surprise. However, in 1940, the German units swiftly advanced through the largely undefended Ardennes, encountering significant resistance only after breaking free from its rolling hills and thick woods. In contrast, the December 1944 offensive required German ground forces to engage in battle within the dense forests against well-entrenched defenders. This placed the attacking troops at a significant disadvantage right from the start of the offensive. As the heavy panzers ventured into the expansive Ardennes forests, their drivers quickly discovered that the roads were too narrow for a rapid advance. Many routes were nothing more than dirt trails, barely wide enough for single-lane traffic, a significant challenge for the massive King Tigers and Panthers. In contrast, during the 1940 campaign, the lighter Panzer II, weighing 9 tons, managed the poor roads much more effectively compared to the behemoths of 1944. Even in open areas within the forest, the wet and slushy ground prevented off-road maneuvering, causing the heavy tanks to sink deep into the mud, further hindering their progress. From the perspective of the holy trinity of tank design, protection, firepower, and mobility, German tanks deployed in the Ardennes campaign boasted impressive characteristics. Yet, their actual performance during the battle was underwhelming. This disappointment stemmed primarily from two critical factors: the deteriorating quality of German industry and the inadequate training of German tank crews. The clearest evidence of these issues emerged in the days leading up to the campaign during Operation Abwehr. This operation involved the movement of German Panzer divisions from their staging areas along the Rhine to their starting points for the Ardennes offensive in the Eifel region near the Belgian border. Sepp Dietrich, commander of the 6th Panzer Army, reported a troubling statistic. Approximately 100 out of the roughly 500 tanks in the field army had broken down after the grueling 3-day road march to the starting point. This breakdown highlighted the significant mechanical issues and logistical challenges faced by German forces even before the battle commenced. For instance, on December 15th, the 12th SS Panzer Division had 46 tanks and armored fighting vehicles undergoing repairs out of the 115 available. As the Ardennes campaign began, 29% of the Panthers were not operational. While precise details on the causes of these issues were not fully reported, it was likely a combination of mechanical difficulties, compounded by the inexperienced tank drivers' poor skills. The reliability issues with German tanks were not a recent concern, but worsened notably in the autumn of 1944. Back in September 1942, Hitler had initiated a new Panzer program aimed at ramping up production to 800 tanks per month. While this directive initially bolstered resources allocated to tank manufacturing, it also politicized the reporting of monthly Panzer production and resulted in some questionable industrial decisions. Albert Speer, the Reich Minister for Armaments, faced constant pressure from Hitler regarding the ambitious goals of the new Panzer production targets. With Germany's industrial resources limited and competing with other critical programs, Speer was compelled to reallocate resources from less scrutinized sectors to ramp up monthly Panzer production rates. For instance, truck production was curtailed to prioritize tank manufacturing. One of the most detrimental policies was the cutback in the production of spare tank parts. Rather than maintaining reserves of crucial subcomponents, these parts were diverted to produce new Panzers, exacerbating the reliability and maintenance issues faced by German tank units. This strategy underscored the difficult trade-offs and resource constraints that defined Germany's wartime industrial strategy under Speer's leadership. In 1943, spare parts had accounted for as much as 25 to 30% of tank contracts. By the summer of 1944, this allocation had dwindled, with only about 15% of Maybach engines reserved as spares. By autumn 1944, this reserve had halved again to just 8%. As a consequence, when Panzers broke down, there were often no parts available for repairs, exacerbating maintenance challenges on the battlefield. In addition, 1944 witnessed a notable deterioration in workmanship within German industry. Skilled craftsmen, previously exempt from conscription, were increasingly drafted into the Wehrmacht due to the high casualty rates. This led to a workforce shift, where foreign force laborers from France and Western Europe, along with slave laborers from Eastern Europe, filled the gaps. This change further strained production quality and efficiency across German factories during a critical phase of the war effort. Not only did these workers lack the skills of the previous German workforce, but sabotage also started to become a serious issue. The combination of these industrial problems resulted in a significant decline in the quality of the Panzers being produced. The Inspector General for Panzer Troops of OB West later reported that some new replacement tanks sent to the Ardennes were dismantled for parts to repair tanks already at the front, rather than being deployed directly to the Panzer divisions. Out of 47 Panther tanks in the Ardennes inspected by Allied intelligence after the fighting, 20 had been abandoned or destroyed by their crews. German prisoners of war revealed that a greater number of Panther tanks were lost due to mechanical breakdowns rather than enemy action. The slow rate of re-equipping Panzer divisions with equipment after the summer campaign contributed to technical problems in the Ardennes, as did a lack of time to train fresh crews. New Panthers were not delivered to divisions until mid-October or November, and tank crew training was typically limited to 2 weeks, even for elite Waffen-SS formations. The training was hampered by a nearly complete absence of fuel and ammunition. Gunnery training consisted of dry runs, with the occasional usage of coaxial machine guns. The fuel shortage prevented exercises above the platoon level. During the Ardennes fighting, the Heer Panzer crews of the 5th Panzer Army were generally better trained than the Waffen-SS crews, simply because these divisions had remained in combat throughout the autumn, maintaining their experience and skills. The rugged landscape only amplified the Reich's greatest weakness, the persistent fuel shortage. While most German vehicles had poor fuel efficiency, the King Tiger was the worst offender. Despite being one of Germany's most renowned panzer leaders, Peiper despised the King Tiger for its numerous flaws, chief among them being its abysmal fuel efficiency of barely half a mile per gallon. In contrast, the more common German Panzer IV and the American Sherman had more than double the fuel efficiency of the King Tiger. Yet, despite its terrible fuel consumption and mechanical unreliability, a staggering 1/3 of Germany's total production of King Tigers for the entire war was deployed to the Ardennes in the winter of 1944. The division faced significant challenges. Only one of its 6 Panzer Grenadier battalions had armored half-tracks, leaving the others dependent on trucks, often commercial models, ill-suited for cross-country operations. The divisional artillery lacked self-propelled guns and relied on towed guns, which struggled to keep pace with panzer regiments during offensive maneuvers. Additionally, there was a pervasive shortage of artillery ammunition, except during the initial days of the Ardennes offensive. Compounding these issues, there was a severe lack of experienced combat leaders due to the high casualty rates endured throughout 1944. The failure of the Ardennes offensive was significantly influenced by these initial infantry setbacks, which caused critical delays in deploying the Panzer breakthrough force. These delays hindered the momentum necessary for the offensive to succeed. A clear indication of the stagnation in Panzer Division technical development was the absence of armored engineer vehicles capable of swiftly breaching obstacles under fire during offensive operations. Unlike their Allied counterparts, who had dozer tanks, mine roller tanks, and other specialized equipment, the Panzer divisions lacked such assets. This deficiency had significant consequences during the initial days of combat in the Ardennes. The 12th SS Panzer Division faced a row of Dragon's Teeth anti-tank obstacles along their front line but lacked the necessary equipment, such as dozer tanks, to quickly overcome them. Instead, they had to rely on conventional engineering efforts, which were ineffective under fire. This delayed the opening of the access roads by a full day. In the 1st SS Panzer Division sector, Kampfgruppe Peiper was delayed by a downed bridge outside Logistical, causing massive traffic jams. Even after maneuvering around the obstruction, further delays ensued when the unit encountered an unmarked German minefield. It took hours for engineers to manually breach the minefield before KG Peiper could resume its advance. German plans had anticipated that by the end of December 16th, the Panzer divisions of 1st SS Panzer Corps would have penetrated well beyond the frontier defenses. However, the failure of the German infantry to breach American defenses, coupled with the Panzer division's inability to swiftly penetrate the obstacle belts along the Belgian frontier, led to significant delays. These setbacks proved costly and ultimately spelled the doom of the offensive. In contrast to the Panzer divisions, U.S. armored divisions typically fought at nearly full strength. American armored infantry battalions and armored field artillery battalions were fully mechanized, ensuring they could swiftly maneuver on the battlefield. Ammunition and fuel supplies were plentiful, providing sustained operational capability. The most significant advantage for the U.S. was its field artillery. Both divisional and corps-level artillery units were fully motorized, with ample supplies of ammunition. Crucially, the U.S. Army possessed a superior fire control system compared to the Germans. This system relied on extensive field telephone and radio networks, enabling precise and timely targeting of enemy positions, which proved crucial in combat operations. Thus, U.S. field artillery, more than any other single arm, played a crucial role in decimating German infantry divisions during the initial phase of the offensive. It also proved instrumental in the defeat of the Panzer divisions of 1st SS Panzer Corps, particularly in the battles around Elsenborn Ridge, where it significantly contributed to the defeat of the 12th SS Panzer Division. The Wehrmacht likely incurred total losses of approximately 610 tanks and AFVs during the Ardennes campaign, with an additional 770 being disabled, resulting in a total of 1,385 vehicles lost or incapacitated. U.S. tank losses in the Ardennes were higher than German losses, primarily because the U.S. Army had a significantly larger number of tanks and AFVs engaged in the campaign. By the end of December 1944, the 1st U.S. Army had around 1,085 Shermans available, with approximately 980 operational and roughly 9% sidelined due to mechanical issues or battle damage. By mid-January, the 6th Panzer Army was relocated from the Ardennes to Hungary to counter the Red Army's winter offensives. On February 5, 1945, OB West had only 190 tanks, 533 assault guns, and 87 tank destroyers operational across the entire Western Front, largely due to the catastrophic losses suffered in the winter campaigns in the Ardennes and Alsace. By April 4, 1945, the German forces were left with only 47 tanks, 183 assault guns, and 39 tank destroyers. In contrast, they faced 6,340 U.S. Sherman tanks and 4,240 British tanks, along with thousands of other types of AFVs. The Ardennes campaign clearly delivered such a devastating blow to the Panzer Force in the West that they could no longer function as a unit capable of any fighting strength.